Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from YourBlackWorld.com. A lot of you have been following the George Zimmerman trial. George Zimmerman was on trial for killing Trayvon Martin. It was probably the biggest, most racially charged trial since the O.J. Simpson trial. And similar to the O.J. Simpson trial, a big chunk of the country was on the edge of their seat waiting for the verdict, and most of you know what the verdict was. You know that Zimmerman was found not guilty of killing Trayvon Martin. Now, I wanted to talk about this case with my partner in crime, Ms. Yvette Carnell. How are you doing today, Yvette?
I'm doing okay. How about you?
I'm doing good. Now, first of all, before we begin, I need to mention that you were one of the few people I know who actually predicted a not guilty verdict. How did that happen? How did you know that the verdict was going to be not guilty? I didn't think it was going to be not guilty. How did you know?
Well, this not guilty verdict is certainly not something that I wanted. But when I looked at how the prosecution was putting on this case, what occurred to me is that if you honestly look at the prosecution, that they weren't trying to win. I saw a prosecution that was not strenuously, going after the witnesses. I saw a prosecution that didn't prepare Rachel Gentile, who was their key witness. They didn't prepare her for trial. Gentile's attorney was actually on Piers Morgan and said that he wasn't brought into the mix until the week before she testified, and that the prosecution really got her prepared in terms of answering prosecution questions, but they didn't get her adequately prepared for actually going back and forth with the defense. The first thing, and I'm no attorney, but the first thing you tell a witness when they're going to be going on the cross-examination is to only answer the question that you're asked. Don't answer anything else. And I saw Rachel Gentile, who was a very young person. People forget, Rachel Gentile was very young. I saw her go back and forth with the defense attorney, and I understand that. That's what kids do. But she was not prepared. So really it occurred to me that this trial was sort of a sham. This trial was a way to kind of tamp down the feelings in the black community and just for black people to be able to say, well, the wheels of justice move for us and we have to move on. I don't think they were in it to win it. I never thought they were in it to win it, and that's why I saw a not guilty verdict come.
Wow. That is a very interesting point of view, and it makes sense. I've always told people that you're smarter than I am, and this is a great example. I didn't see it. I really thought that they were going to give him something just to appease or at least compromise with the public, because this case is so extraordinary in that you cannot fathom how Zimmerman could have been allowed to walk based on what happened. Trayvon Martin wasn't doing a thing, and except walking down the street. And somehow you think he is suspicious because he's a black man walking down the street, and you kill him, and you don't get any prison time for that? I mean, that blows my mind. It really it's so interesting. I think that there's a lot to be said for those people who are comparing this to the Michael Vick trial, where people were talking about giving him the death penalty because he killed some dogs. And now you've got people celebrating George Zimmerman walking free after killing a human being. So, I mean, what does this say about race in America and race as it pertains to the justice system?
Honestly, I think this says a lot about race, but this actually says a lot about how black men are still perceived in this society. No matter what happens, no matter what facts are presented, black men are perceived as aggressive, overly aggressive, and Herculean in strength. They're almost perceived as superhuman, dogs or animals of some sort. Like even when you think about something as normal as marijuana. Marijuana is normal and prevalent in our societies. A lot of states are trying to legitimize and legalize marijuana. So everyone knows, and any kind of marijuana study we've ever saw says that marijuana relaxes the body. Marijuana is a depressant. You had George Zimmerman's attorney go on TV and say Trayvon Martin could have been made more aggressive by marijuana. And I've seen people on the right, white people, who say, yeah, well, that's possible. When it's a black man, anything is possible. He can be made aggressive by anything. You just never know. Anything could just set him off and he's ready to kill. So this kind of perception of who black men are just very prevalent in our society. And when you look at it, this was the best case for anyone to win. Like, if George Zimmerman had killed the little white boy, he'd be in jail right now for life. Because George Zimmerman said on that call, these blanks always get away. He said, I'm going to keep eye contact on Trayvon Martin because I don't want to lose him. These are things that he was saying to the dispatcher. He had already perceived Trayvon Martin as a threat, as a thug, as a would-be robber, and that's the kind of malice he had in his heart when he approached Trayvon Martin. And even if you look at the scene of the crime, there was no way for a 5'10" Trayvon Martin to hide behind a bush and jump out at George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman was doing the hunting. He was the predator, and he got his prey. And nobody within most people within the conservative white community don't care because that's how they perceive black men.
Wow. I think that you're right. I think that there is a perception that black men are less than human. I think that whether you are a victim or a perpetrator in this criminal justice system, you're not going to get justice as a black man. When I think about Trayvon's murder, which it was a murder, let's be clear about that. I think about when my best friend was murdered, and I remember that he was a good family man. He had a 3-year-old daughter, and he was shot in the head in his house in front of his 3-year-old daughter. And now he was killed by some guys that were doing something illegal, breaking in his house and whatnot. But I remember when he died, and this guy was just like me. His name was Greg Wilkins. We were best friends for a reason because we were similar people. And when he died, they treated it as if he must have been doing something wrong. The police did a half-assed investigation. They talked about there was a white woman who was killed in the suburbs on the same day. My friend's story it barely made the local newspaper. Whereas this white woman with 3 kids, when she got killed, they had a week-long vigil. They put out all this massive reward to find the killer. They talked about it every single day of the week. And I remember being angry. I mean, this was 96, back right around the time Tupac got killed. And that was my best friend. And I was so hurt and so angry that people see people like us as less than human. It just makes you angry. So, I think that this, if anything, if there's any way to make something productive out of this, I'm hopeful that this will help all of us understand that this justice system is built on the idea of a Holocaust. It is built on the notion of destroying the entire black community, and it has done that. It has done so many horrible things. Again, whether you're a victim or a perpetrator, it's done horrible things to our kids in terms of the changing the culture. It's changed what happens when we are incarcerated. It changes what happens to our families. This system has to be dealt with. I really can't. I think I'm at a point, and I have to calm down because tomorrow I'm going to talk to on the air with Reverend Jesse Jackson about it and whatnot. And I have to calm down because right now there's really nothing you could tell me that people did in reaction to this verdict that would make me say, don't do that. I mean, if you told me they shot somebody over this verdict, it would be hard for me to say, oh, that's a bad thing. Or if they burned something down over this verdict, it's hard for me to say, please don't do that, because I'm tired of sitting here and watching our kids die. I am just sick and tired of it. It's driving me crazy. So, Yvette, please say something rational, because right now I'm talking a little bit out of my head.
I never. My whole thing about rioting is always don't destroy your own things, so I can't say anything rational. My thing is if you're
destroy somebody else's stuff.
There's no reason to destroy your neighborhood. That really doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? And if you and I'm not saying that you should go out and be violent, because I think they just use that to turn that against us. Now this is what I will say, and I know I'm going to take heat for this. But if some violence had been perpetrated against George Zimmerman that night, say against his father, after finding out that someone had, put a bullet through his son's chest, I would have stood for that father. I would have said, this is what happened. The father, his son was slaughtered in the street for no reason, so that's understandable, and I would stand with him no matter what. And I think we have to understand it. I think we have to understand that we have a right to defend ourselves. Because when you look at this case, I can't get over just how awful this is in terms of George Zimmerman is a confirmed liar. This is a guy who's been arrested before. This is a guy whose girlfriend said that he was abusive. This is a guy who was caught on tape, talking to his girlfriend, telling her to move money, his wife telling her to move money around when he told the court that they were destitute, they didn't have any money. He's a liar. He's always been a liar. this is, and his family has proven that they are racist. Because here's the thing. You had his father come out and write a $3.99 ebook about how the real racists are black leaders, as if that meant anything, as if your son who stalked and racially profiled the black boy isn't racist, but it's that projection. It's always the black people's fault, Then you had his brother, Robert Zimmerman, tweet a tweet comparing Trayvon Martin to the teen who killed a baby and said, this is why black people are suspicious. That's a quote from Robert Zimmerman's tweet. So you have there a racist family, who it's been quoted as, they have exhibited racist behavior. George Zimmerman racially profiled Trayvon Martin on that night when he really wasn't doing anything wrong. Everybody said, well, George Zimmerman should have stayed in his car, and that's true. But really, when you think about it, why did he even call the police? Because a black man was walking down the street? We can't walk down the street without being perceived as suspicious. He wasn't around a car, trying to get into a car, trying to get into a window. He was walking. So, and the whole hoodie thing, it was raining. So it's almost as if you don't adhere to some ever-changing white standard of good Negro-ness, then, it's okay to kill you because you had that hoodie on and you were in a neighborhood where white people live. So there are all these little arbitrary standards that make it okay to kill black people, especially black men, just given the circumstances. If white people just kind of feel it's okay at that moment, then it's okay. Because I had a right to perceive this 150-pound black boy who's much lighter than me in weight, who's younger than me. I had the right to perceive this guy as being a reasonable threat. When no one asks themselves, when's the last time you heard a man kill another man with his bare hands? When has that happened?
I agree. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, this whole case was just disgusting to watch. I was already disgusted by the fact that there've been hundreds, maybe thousands of Trayvon Martins that have died since this trial began, and a lot of them didn't get killed by someone who wasn't black. They were killed by black men, and the reaction is not the same. So that was already frustrating me. But I wanted to see justice for Trayvon and his family, and I wanted to see justice for all the young black men or women who might go through something like this. And so, as the verdict got closer, I paid close attention. And my heart just fell out of my chest when I saw not guilty. And I was sitting in a hotel room all by myself, and it was like there was no reaction. I didn't hear the screams or the gasps or anything that everybody else was hearing around the country, and I just felt that it was just this sort of heavy moment, and it seemed so like people just like the world had just made it so insignificant that to me it felt like this boy died. His whole future's gone. Whatever it was he was trying to do in life, who he was going to be, everything he was going to experience was dead, was gone and dead because some asshole, excuse my French, this person, George Zimmerman, decided to stalk him and shoot him. And the justice system did not convict him. That's an eye-opener for all of us. And I think that we need to really think about whether this justice system is fair to us. We know it's not fair. But now I think we see very clearly that there's a serious problem here, and it's got to be dealt with. I think this is the beginning of the story. I don't think this is the end of anything. I think the next few weeks are going to be really interesting, and I don't think people are going to forget this for the next 20 or 30 years. What do you think, Yvette?
Well, I don't think we should forget it. And let me just be clear about one thing. And I don't even know where this goes in terms of what our strategy is. But I remember when O.J. Simpson when he was found not guilty. I want to just say that the people who wanted to get O.J. Simpson didn't stop until O.J. Simpson was in jail. They went and got a civil trial, and they took all of his money, okay? And that ripped one part of his life apart. Now he's in jail for stealing his own things. And the man who was actually holding the gun in that robbery was actually the informant for the police. So, when they feel like a black man has gotten off in this society, they don't stop until they get that black man, unless it's 10, 15, 20 years later. I think in terms of Zimmerman, we have to really consider a civil trial. We have to really consider going after him financially, and we have to put that on the table because this is the worst of defendants. People have to consider that this guy was a problem. He had exhibited tendencies in the past that were problematic. Trayvon Martin was a good student. One of his English teachers described him as cheerful, never been arrested, called 911 dozens of times. He had complaints from neighbors about how aggressive he was in the neighborhood. He's a troubled soul. He's a troubled man. But we couldn't even find this guy, Zimmerman, guilty of murder, given all of his problems, his sort of wannabe cop thing he had going on. He tried to do that and it didn't work out, so he decided to be a vigilante in his own neighborhood. If we can't find that kind of guy guilty, then what happens when a guy who's actually reasonably stable but also a racist kills another black guy? What happens when a guy who actually is, more or less decent, more or less stable, but is also racist, racially profiled, tracks a black guy and kills him? It'll be much more difficult.
I think you make a very good point. It'll be incredibly difficult. I think that we know, one thing we know is that white privilege certainly tells us that we don't have the same rights that white people have. We don't have the right to go and shoot somebody, and even if we can prove that it was justified. We don't have the right to do that and then expect to walk away free. We don't have the right to kill a white person like that. I mean, that's certainly not going to happen. You're not going to, if you're a black man, you're not going to shoot a young white boy and go to court and have the judge understand why you stalked him and hunted him down and then shot him like a dog in the street. Nobody's going to get that. And, in fact, there are lots of men in prison, men and women in prison, who killed someone defending themselves against someone who legitimately was trying to kill them, like that woman down in Florida who didn't even kill her husband, who shot the gun off to scare him away because he threatened to kill her, and she got all those years in prison just for firing the gun.
And it's the same prosecutor in both cases. The Zimmerman case and that case have the same prosecutor, Angela Court.
Wow. Yeah, I just think that it's it's a clear double standard, and the funny thing about America too is that many of us as black people have been fooled into believing that this country does care about us if we behave. If we do the right thing, if we are good people, you're going to be okay. And that the reason bad things happen to other people is because they were making bad decisions, or those black people over there, they must have done something to deserve what they received. And what we have to understand is that all of us are vulnerable to this. All of us are vulnerable to the system. All of us are vulnerable to racism. So many people, in fact, we did a story about someone calling someone else the N-word. I can't remember. Oh, about Paula Dean. That's what it was. We got tons of emails from people talking about how they've been called the N-word at work, the racism they experience on the job. And so the racism is everywhere. And what's funny is that we, as a country, just don't see it. We like to believe that America is such a great country that we've overcome a lot of this, when everyone else around the world looks at the United States and says, what in the hell is wrong with y'all? Y'all have no moral authority to go throughout the world and judge anybody in terms of how they do things, because you are in a horrifically racist country. So, I'm done. I have nothing else to say. I'll let you get the last word, Yvette.
No, I think it is sad when you had a good kid go up against a guy who, we have, proof that the guy was a liar, proof that he had, some anger issues. These things were all made public before the trial. And even with that type of character flaw, the jury was still unable, to find him guilty, even when, he could say, if George Zimmerman could say that he had a reasonable fear of his life from Trayvon Martin, then anybody can say in any instance that they had a reasonable fear of their life in any circumstance. Because a young boy, a teenager who's that much younger than you, who's that much lighter in weight than you, can't kill you with his bare hands. If he didn't brandish a weapon, that's impossible. So even the jury, even in terms of how they came to this verdict, goes against everything we know about gravity, everything we know about pain, everything we know about injuries, since his injuries were all minor. So, you can't be good enough to fight racism. You can't be good enough to go against white supremacy. You have to get rid of white supremacy. There's not a job good enough you can have that will stop somebody from thinking of you as less than, as exposable and expendable, and that's what we're dealing with.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that I think I just need to go to bed. I'm just exasperated and irritated and just tired. So maybe we'll start off tomorrow, and maybe tomorrow will be a better day. I believe that sometimes your darkest moment can be your greatest hour, and I'm hopeful that seeing the justice system for what it is will allow our community to realize that we can't let Trayvon and all those other young children have died in vain. We have to use this as an avenue for additional mobilization to deal with this system head on. And I know personally I'm not going to stop. So thank you for your time, Yvette. Your analysis has been extraordinary, as usual. And thank you all for checking us out at yourblackworld.com. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.